So I recently decided to sit down and replay Divine Divinity. For those of you who don't know, this is the very first game in the Divinity series from Larian Studios, who are more famously known for having made the smash hit Baldur's Gate 3. Now you can see from the gameplay that you're seeing on the screen right now that this is a pretty old game, right? It actually came out originally in 2002, which is kind of crazy because I, as an old person, used to play this game. I did like a few playthroughs and I really enjoyed it. And at the time, I was like, oh yeah, this is a really old game, but it's still really good. And, being an adult, being an old person, for me, my memory is like, hey, that was a few years ago. I should play this again. I should give it another play, especially because recently they unveiled a trailer for a new Divinity game in the series, which got me excited. And then I sat down and I discovered that Steam tells me that I have not played this game since 2012, which means that it has been 14 years since I sat down and played it. And even funnier, that is now longer than it was between when it launched and when I played it, which was about 10 years. And now it's been about 14 years since then, right? So, obviously a very, very old game at this point, but I think it really still holds up. So, to give you a little bit of context on the Divinity series, Larian has been making these games for a long time. I don't think they were really ever super popular, but they certainly kept the studio running. It started off with this game Divine Divinity, which you're seeing now, and then they had a couple sequels and a couple other games, and I don't think any of those did really super well, but really the big thing that happened for Larian was their Divinity Original Sin series, which was 2 games that were also set in the same setting, and those ones did really well, from my memory. Those ones did pretty well and sort of made Larian more visible. After that, then of course they managed to get a hold of the Dungeons & Dragons IP, and they made Baldur's Gate 3, and that is of course the thing that has propelled them to the status of like superstars in the, the RPG, video game community. But that said, they've been making these games again since 2002. They've been making RPGs since 2002, so it stands to reason that they know how to make a good RPG, and that they have learned a lot over the years, and you can see how, they really have developed into a studio that knows what they're doing. So, of course, I'm excited for the upcoming Divinity game, but I wanted to talk a little bit about Divine Divinity and why I liked it so much. So, Divine Divinity is, realistically a pretty standard game, I guess you could say. Like, realistically, they took a lot of the stuff that is in Diablo 2, and they kind of just made it a little bit different. So it's very, very similar to Diablo 2, or even Diablo 1, and you can tell that in a lot of ways. So there's very similar mechanics here, where you have a health bar, and you have a mana bar. You mostly refill these by drinking potions over time that you collect in the game. And of course, also you have essentially a left click that you can use for just attacking, and a right click that you can use to map to an ability. And then you also, of course, have the ability to map different abilities to the F keys, so you can swap between those abilities pretty quickly. One of the interesting things is that they really kind of shifted. They didn't really do like a class system the way that Diablo 2 does. They kind of did it more the way Diablo 1 does it, where essentially you have a character. You can kind of pick if you want to be a wizard, a fighter, or a thief, and then you start off with some basic abilities around that. But really, most of what you do is that every time you level up, you get to pick what stat points you put in, you get to pick what skill points you put in, and you have access to all 3 of those skill trees at any point. So you could be a fighter who, uses some thief stuff and some magic stuff, or, whatever. You can kind of focus more on one group or another when you're building your character, but, really realistically, it probably makes the most sense to mix and match the few things that you want out of all of the 3 skill trees. And this is pretty fun because it means that you're not locked into stuff. It means that you can be a fighter who says, yeah, I also want to be able to pick locks so I can get those chests and things like that. I also want to have the healing spell because that's very important to me, stuff like that. However, what I will say is that this does become a problem at times because functionally, there are really a handful of like best ways to build your character, and there are a lot of wrong ways to build your character. So there are a lot of skills that are kind of stupid or pointless, or don't really do much, or just so weak that it's kind of like, okay, you can really screw things up by investing in this. And that's really one of the core problems of the game, is that it's a very old school RPG where you can't really respec, you can't really change where you've allocated your skill points to your stat points later on if you decide that you made a mistake. And that can be really, really difficult when you realize, like 75% of the way through the game that you've made some serious flaws in your character, and, there's not really anything you could do except start over. Combat-wise, it's pretty good, it's pretty fun, it has a lot of variety, and I enjoy it, but I think that's really the one thing that holds it back, is that you can really screw up your character. For example, in this run, I decided, hey, I'm going to try something a little bit more of a thief. In the past, I've rolled like a fighter, and I've rolled a wizard, so I was like, okay, I'm going to try like focusing on the thief skills. And I decided, okay, I'm going to put a lot of points in this one skill that basically lets you do backstab damage bonus when you attack with a dagger. And I was like, cool, so that'll be an important skill for me. And then I did this, and functionally what I found occurring is that over time, this was a complete waste. Because essentially, there are not actually a lot of good daggers in the game that I found, that I ran across. And so for long periods of time, I was using like the same dagger for like hours and hours and hours, and I wasn't getting an upgrade. And then I found myself having to switch to, other weapons, swords, two-handed stuff, simply because, that wasn't, working. I was doing much more damage with those, even despite the fact that I had this skill that gave me bonus damage when I was using daggers. And so that was a pretty frustrating thing, just realizing like, hey, this skill actually just kind of sucks, and I should have just kind of built myself more like a fighter and gone with it. Admittedly, there are some weirdnesses too, where really the thief skill tree is kind of more like a utility/support skill tree for the other two classes. Like, there's not really any good damage dealing stuff that thieves get aside from traps, which traps are apparently very OP, but I don't really like using them myself. And so really, there's not really you can't really build a strict thief character. You kind of have to really pick either a fighter or a wizard as your primary damage dealing source, and then thief stuff is kind of more just like secondary stuff that you can add on top of that if you want to. So it's kind of a weak class on its own, but that is what it is. The other thing about this game is that while it is functionally very similar to Diablo 2 in terms of the combat, in terms of just how everything works, it is a very different game in terms of its focuses. So whereas Diablo 2 are obviously really action-focused, combat-focused RPGs, this game really alternates between segments that are extremely focused on combat, like the segment that you're seeing me play through right now, which is like an early part of the game, some catacombs, like one of the first major combat areas. You kind of see this variation between, like the combat focused stuff, and then sort of like, okay, there's also the inventory focused stuff. There's the interacting with shopkeepers, selling stuff, buying potions that you need. A lot more of that than you see in Diablo. And then there's just a lot of role-playing stuff. So there's a lot of stuff where you're like, hey, I'm running around a city, and like I'm not doing any combat, I'm talking to people, and all of that. So I think that it's kind of like what would happen if you took really like the combat system of Diablo and you mixed it with more of a role-playing focus like you would see in some of the earlier Baldur's Gate games. And for that reason, I do like it a lot. It's a really fun game. It's really cool. I mean, the plot is a little bit silly, but it's like a classic, it's a classic fantasy plot. Essentially just that, very long time ago, some good guys saved the world, and now bad guys are coming back, and so what you have to do is like assemble a council of elders and get like a blessing so that you can become the divinity, so that you can fight the big bad evil. That's really all there is to it. There's definitely some funny side quests. There's definitely some funny bits in the main plot as well. And yeah, like overall, it's just a fun game. There are some issues, I would say, with just sort of like how, it's such an old game that you're not really handheld on a lot of stuff, and you have to figure out a lot of stuff for yourself. So again, like I mentioned, how you could really build your character kind of wrong. There's also ways that you can build your character very right. And the only way to find that out is to, experiment and try it out, or, look up a guide online, right? So there's, for example, stuff like the fact that just getting 1 point in like the alchemy skill is wonderful because it allows you to make the most overpowered potions in the game. They're not supposed to be that overpowered, but they are. And so it's like, okay, basically everyone needs to get 1 point in the skill because it just makes everything better, all of your potions amazing. There's also just not a lot of guidance with the quests. You'll get basically like a really basic quest log that's like, hey, I have to figure out how to do X. And you're not really told any other information about how to do X or like what you should do next, or in many cases, like whether it's even possible to do X at this point in the plot. You might get a thing that's like, hey, investigate this guy's death. And you go, okay, great. Is there anything I can do about that? And the answer is actually no. The answer is that if you just keep playing the game, eventually, like half of the game later, you'll get to a point where you can randomly talk to a guy who happens to give you a hint that it was a vampire that did it. And then you go, okay, well, now I know that I need to look for a vampire that might have done it. And then another quarter of the way through the game, you happen to run into a guy who's a vampire, and you can go, oh, hey, are you the guy that killed that other guy? And he'll go, yeah, I killed him, and then you kill the vampire. It's like, great. But you were not given any indication that this is not a quest that you should complete, much earlier on in the game. And so there's a lot of quests where it's just very easy to be like, I don't actually know what I'm supposed to do. I don't know if I'm supposed to do something now or much later. And there's also a lot of opportunities to just completely miss out on being able to complete quests as a result. And so it's a bit of a mess. I would say also that this is the kind of game, right, where you'd love to look up guides. You'd love to be like, okay, well, a lot of the mechanics are not clear. A lot of what's good and bad with the skill trees is not clear. A lot of these quests are not clear. I don't really know what I'm supposed to be doing. There were places where I got stuck because it was like, oh, you're in this room and you're supposed to like click on this particular lever, but I like couldn't find the lever. Silly stuff like that. But while that kind of information used to exist, it does not exist anymore in many cases. Because again, this is now a 24-year-old game. And so a lot of that information was on websites like Game FAQs and, hilariously enough, the Larian web forums, which apparently don't really exist anymore. Just things like that, where it's just like the sources of collective knowledge, the sources of information just don't exist. Or they do, but they're harder to find. Or they do, but they're just like not good quality because they were just made by like some dingus, and you're like, I just wish I had like video to walk me through this or something like that. It does not have the level of support that you would see with a modern game for that reason. So I think it's a really, really worthwhile game to play. I really enjoy it. I like it a lot. It is a game that I think very fondly of, and I enjoyed playing through it again recently. It'll take you probably about 30 to 60 hours, just depending on how quickly you get through stuff, how much help you need, how thorough you want to be, etc. Which I think I like, also, I should note. I do like it when an RPG is not terribly long. Personally, I think that an RPG should be like 30 to 50 hours max. I really think most games should be like 20 hours. I think 20 hours is like the perfect length for a game in general. I will say that I was playing through Divinity Original Sin and Divinity Original Sin 2 a few years ago, and those games are so long. I think that I hit a point where you get to like the 75-hour mark in a video game where you go like, okay, you know what? I just want this to be over. Like, I genuinely am having fun, but I just don't want to keep playing. I don't want to have to do more stuff. And that's how I felt about Divinity Original Sin and Original Sin 2, just because those are very long, like 100-hour games. Conversely, this is nice, bite-sized, 30 to 60 hours, a bit on the long side. I wish it was slightly shorter, but personally, I still enjoy it quite a lot. Is it worth picking up again? Absolutely. I think it's a little rough around the edges now, just because, again, it's like 25 years old. It's harder to, get it to work right on modern computers. I had to, do some weird messing around with the resolutions just to get it to actually run at a resolution that made sense. But I mean, it's also cheap as hell. It's like $5 or even less if it's on sale. And I mean, it's hard to knock that, right? Like, it's a great experience. Costs you almost nothing. The graphics are relatively primitive, but that doesn't really stop you from enjoying it. So I do highly recommend it if you're interested. Of course, I am looking forward to the new Divinity game when it comes out, and I hope that Larian knocks this one out of the park just like they did with Baldur's Gate 3. So that is all for today's video. I hope you have enjoyed it. As always, don't hesitate to like, comment, subscribe, smash that notification bell. Comment down below. Let me know what hate mail you have for me. Have a good week, and I will talk to you all next time.